everybody. Thank you very much for joining us here today at 9.Connects. Today's topic is splunking in the Altium schematic preferences here today. So before we begin, I just want to give you a couple of housekeeping notes. First and foremost, try it as I may, there's no way I can go through all of the schematic preferences in 1 hour. Or I could, but I think none of us would really gain anything from it. And I want to be very, very methodical about this, and you'll definitely see that as we're going through this webinar today. So I want to give you a heads up immediately that part 2 is going to be on December 20th, so mark your calendar for that, and we'll certainly send out an announcement for that here in the next week. Also, I unfortunately will not have time for any verbal questions. However, please do submit them, use the questions panel, and feel free to comment on any preference, anything that I may have glossed over or skipped, anything that you know historically about a particular preference. We definitely want to collect that information and put together a very, very comprehensive Q&A for this. It's our understanding that after what I've seen out there, there really is not much to find in terms of the preferences other than what you might be able to find in the general commentary in Altium's Tech Docs. So before we begin, we do have 2 polls for you. So we'll throw those up here on the screen right now. So the first poll is to just basically rate yourself. I'm just kind of curious to understand how much knowledge you may feel or that you do have in the preferences. So give that a moment here. Okay, we're going to close the poll over here, and we're going to show those results. And it looks like 49% of you guys are claiming that you're pretty knowledgeable about it, and it's almost kind of a split. About 50% saying that either they're knowledgeable or expert, or that it's 50% saying that they're either novice or Luddite in it. So this will be an interesting crowd to work with today because I'm working with both levels here. We do have one more poll for you, so we'll bring that up here right now. So this is the question of just about configuration management in general. As you're going to see, preferences are definitely a part of that whole concept of configuration management. Okay, and so we will share those here as well. So what it's showing is over 68% of you are basically handling your own configuration management, with the rest of you having the administrator doing. Actually, 17% of you are saying that the company administrators handle it for you, which is nice. I wish I had that. And the other 15% are saying that that you actually have to handle it for your company there. So an interesting distribution of that. So wanted to put that there for you guys. And at this point in time, what we'll do is we're going to continue on over here, so we have quite a bit to cover over here. This is as much as you're going to see about PowerPoint slides here today. We're going to jump into it. So let's bring this PowerPoint slide down here. All right, so what I've done for you is I've gone through these preferences, and I spent some time to figure out little examples that I can show you so you can have a better feel for them. By the way, these sheets are available for you afterwards, so if you want them, let us know. You can put that in either the comment or in the questions thing, and we'll get those out to you here so you can play with them. So that's what we've set up. A couple of what I'll call general notes about preferences. First and foremost, there's 2 ways to get to the preferences. Most people know of it through the DXP preferences, and that's how you get through it. That's how most people will get through it. A lot of people don't realize that in the editors you can get to them as well, and that's under Tools and Schematic Preferences. And by the way, the same thing does also exist in the PCB editor as well. As a matter of fact, the shortcut key T followed by the letter P is the one that I'm going to use in order for me to go in and out of the preferences throughout this webinar here today. The other note that I want to make to you is I've seen some preliminary information about Altium Designer 18, and the DXP menu option here is going to actually go away. So where are they going to put the preferences? Well, you may have noticed on a lot of websites and on newer software that when they talk about settings or preferences, they always have a little cog next to it. And that seems to be the common, I guess, universal way of declaring settings or preferences. And in addition to that, that's normally found on the right-hand side of either the website or the software. So in Altium Designer 18, they're going to have a cog up in the top right corner, and that's where you're going to find your preferences. However, pretty much most of the preferences I've seen, at least the pictures I've seen so far, they look very, very similar. In certain cases, some have been added and some have been removed. But since we don't have Altium Designer 18 out at this point in time, we're going to work obviously in Altium Designer 17. Okay, so with that being said, let's get on with it over here. Oh, and one last thing. So let me jump back into the preferences just for your knowledge. What I'm going to cover here today is I'm going to cover the general page. So we're going to go through all of these over here. And I'm also going to talk about break wire, the grids, and the default units. The other ones that they have over here I will cover in the next webinar. So let's take a look at each and every single one of these over here. Let's get started here. So the first one in the list, if I hit my letters T and P and bring this up, is break wires at auto junction. And this is turned on by default. So what does this do? Well, when we do a place of wire and we bring it across all the way here, you'll notice that Altium automatically creates a junction. Okay, and the junction over here, you'll notice that it breaks it up into two different segments. Okay, and that allows us to select it once and twice and to delete it. But if you don't want it to do that, what you can do is you can hit TP here and you can turn it off. So let me draw it out. Okay, and there it is. And what happens here is you'll notice this is no longer broken. All right, this one is no longer broken either. So by turning that on, it allows it to be broken. Let's just turn that back on. You'll notice, by the way, that it will actually fix it once I do it again. I don't know if you want to say the words "fix it," but it will. It seems to put the break in there. Let's go over here, and let's put this one over here. And then you'll notice that now, actually, it didn't do it this time, but sometimes it will actually break this segment even further here. So, nevertheless, that's what it's doing for you. I think you should leave it on simply because it allows you a little more control over deleting the segments. So there it is. All right, let's take a look at another one here. This is optimized buses and wires. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how it looks when you first use it with it being turned on. So if I hit PW, which is place wire, okay, I'll draw out a wire over here. And now I'm going to draw in another wire. And if I overlap it, Altium doesn't care. So what it's going to do is it's going to basically optimize it, meaning it's going to make it one segment. And if you don't like that, you can turn this off. So I'm going to go into the options and turn off optimized wires and buses. So I'll press OK. And now what will happen here is that if I do it, it will allow me to create these things as individual segments. And there you go. So these are individual segments. Now, there is a caveat to this, and I want to show you this. If I overshoot it, I'm going to have a problem with it. So if I hit TP again here, just to show you again, it's turned off. And I go place wires, that's PW. So I'm just trying to use these shortcuts to keep it moving along. And I overshoot this by mistake. You can see that now I have a little bit of a problem. And unfortunately, I can't just grab that little section in the middle over here. Maybe I can. This time it worked, but sometimes it wasn't allowing me to grab those sections over there to fix that. And I would have to actually delete one of these parts and do it again. So sometimes it works and sometimes it hasn't. But that overshoot can be kind of problematic. So I just wanted to forewarn you that if you are going to use it, it's kind of nice, but sometimes overshooting it can cause a little bit of a hassle to try to grab those. And this particular instance, and I swear I've gone through this webinar about 10 times in practicing it and never was able to grab it. Of course, this time I was able to grab it. So go figure. Anyways, so that's what we've got over here. So that's the optimized, the wires, and the buses. Okay. Another one that they have over here is component breaks wire. Now, in order for you to use this, you actually have to turn on optimized wires and buses. So this is components, cuts wires, and I'm going to turn this on as well to show you what happens. And this is kind of a neat feature that I don't think a lot of people realize, that if you have a resistor and you drop it in there, and as long as it's turned on, it just puts it in there automatically. Okay, so it's already taken it, it's broken the wire, and it's already put it in there, and there you go. It's now in line with it, which is a really nice feature. So what happens when we turn it off? Well, if we turn it off, what's going to happen here is we're going to see that the wire here is going to not be broken. And as a matter of fact, you can see there's junctions because what we effectively have done is we've added the resistor into the wire, and now the wire is shorting the resistor. So that's what would happen with this over here. So yeah, unfortunately, there's a little bit of a compromise you have to make, that if you want to turn off the optimized wires and buses, you can do so. But if you do so, then you turn off the component cuts wires. So just be aware of that here. So let's move on to the next one. So let's do a view fit here, and we'll zoom in. So this is an interesting one that I don't think we realized is there. But anytime you need to do any type of editing of the text, it makes it really easy for me to not have to go into the property. So for example, in this note that I've got over here, if I click on it to select it and then I click again, so I don't want to do a rapid double click, but just one click followed by another click methodically, I can get in here and I can do an edit without getting into the dialog boxes. And that's also true with something like for example, a net label. I can do the same thing as well. I select it once, I select it again, and I can press it. Actually, in this case, it's just been once and then twice, and there we go. Shouldn't even have been in the dialog box to do that, though I could certainly do that. Okay? And that works for pretty much any text, even a designator here. So if I click once and click again, then I could give it a different designator name if I wanted to. So what the editor InPlace is doing is allowing me to do this without getting into the properties. So if I hit TP and I go into you turn off the enable InPlace editing, it basically turns that off. So in order for me to go into this, I actually have to double click into it and then go into whatever property that allows me to make those changes there. I recommend that you leave it on simply because one of the big problems, especially with notes, is that if you go in here, you'll notice that the font and the font size and even the word wrap is not going to match up with whatever you're going to get as a result of that over here. So it's a lot easier to see kind of in real time what you're going to be typing out. It's not perfect, but it works a lot better than trying to go into this little generic text editor to try to see how this is eventually going to come out. So I recommend that this one be left on. Okay? So that's what that one does. All right, let's get on to this one. This is an interesting one, and it has consequences. So this is called Control Double Click Opens the Sheet, and this is primarily used for those things that are hierarchical in nature. And you can see over here in this this design that we do have a little bit of a hierarchy that I've set up over here. So this is a sheet symbol, and it represents this thing called examplesheet.schdoc. And we probably should do a webinar on this at some point because they're very, very easy to make, and it makes it very easy to have representation of sheets within sheets. Okay? But nevertheless, what this allows me to do is that it allows me to jump around my project to follow things without having to go to the projects panel. So yes, I could go to my projects panel and open this and look at it, but if I want to follow it through the sheets itself, I can hold down my control key, double click into it, and then it jumps me straight to that particular page. And if I want to jump up again, I can hold down my control key and click on one of the ports, and it brings me to that port on that particular sheet symbol. So pretty nice little feature that they've added in over here. What this preference is saying is it's saying, okay, well, if you just want to just double click on it to jump around, you can do that. So let's see what happens when we turn that off. So I just double click and boom, it jumps me to that sheet. Let's find another port here just to give it a little bit of a flavor. Here, let's see. Let's jump over here to int. So if I double click on int, it brings me back up to the sheet again. So it works really nice. However, there's a caveat to this. What it does is it impacts the way we handle all the other properties. So for me to get into the properties, for example, of this piece of text, I can't double click it anymore. I actually have to hold down the control key and double click it. And now I can get into the properties. The same thing for anything else over here. Even the sheet symbol itself, if I wanted to get into the properties of it, I have to hold down my control key. And I got to double click into it, and now I got that. So if you're going to turn this one off, there are going to be some implications to it. I think probably the best use of this would be for somebody who has no desire to do any edits, and they're just trying to review the sheets and jump around. Then it would kind of make sense for this to be turned off. Okay. Since I'm over here, we're going to talk about cross junctions now. So cross junctions are an interesting creature. There's been a tremendous amount of debate because it focuses the debate on four-way junctions, which, and trust me, if you read the forums, you're going to see a lot of debate about that. It was really amazing to me how there's really two camps about this. Now, Altium eventually, and I think this was in the last couple of releases, allowed for a four-way junction. Prior to that, they would not do that. So if I type in my place wire, for example, and I place it down, and then I place down this other one over here, in the past, it wouldn't allow this. It would have connected these two wires together. And what you would have had to have done if you wanted a four-way junction was you would have had to go in and place manual junction in order to do that. So now Altium is handling four-way junctions. I'm not sure how or why they relented about it, but nevertheless, now they allow it. but prior to that, if you wanted a four-way junction, Altium had an option for it. So let's bring that up over here. So this is turned off by default. I'll turn this one back on here. I'll turn this one on back as well. But let's go back over here to convert cross junctions. So I'm going to press OK. By the way, notice that everything I've done so far is pretty much static in nature, meaning that once you've made these changes, if you go back in later on and you make the changes again, they're still going to retain the original change you made to them. Other ones are dynamic, and I'll show you those as we go along here. But this is static, and you can see that this one didn't get changed. None of these got changed, even though I told it that I want to convert cross junctions. So I'm going to hit PW so I can start the wire here. And if I come in on the other side, you'll now notice that this was Altium's little compromise over here saying, okay, we will modify this here so that you don't have a four-way junction, but it looks like a four-way junction. So that was their idea behind it. And again, what's interesting about this is that if I turn it off and I press, let's move this here so you can see it, you'll notice that none of these change. So when I press OK, it retains that. So that's the cross junction if you want to use that. So that's the end of page 1 here. Let's jump on over to page 2. So page 2 is kind of interesting because these are the ones that you'll be kind of notice that they're more dynamic in nature, meaning that the change is going to result in something that's going to happen immediately throughout the entire schematics. And by the way, not just the schematics, any schematics that are open within this Altium session. So this is display crossovers. So let's hit TP over here, and we're going to turn on the display crossovers. And what these do, so notice what's going to happen here on the screen is that a lot of times when you learn how to do circuit design, you do a little bump in the wire or a little jump over the wire just to show that it's not connected to it. And so some people want to show that on their designs here. So Altium, if you turn this on, will take care of that for you. So if I press apply here, you'll notice now that there's a little bit of a bump. In fact, let me cancel here so you can zoom it in. So you can see that these little bumps have been added in. This is dynamic, meaning that if I go back over here into the options and I turn it back off, so let's see here, let's turn off our display crossovers and press apply, it's immediate. So just be aware that this is kind of, it's on or it's off, but it doesn't retain it once you turn it off. Okay, so that's this one over here. The next one's an interesting one. You may have not realized that Altium has this, but it's pin direction. Now, the reason I bring this one up is because it brings up some interesting points. So here's a diode. And the interesting thing about a diode is it really doesn't have passive pins. It actually has an input pin and an output pin, because if you put it in backwards, you're going to have some nasty consequences if you flip a diode here. So what I did was I went in there and I changed these pins from output, from basically passives to input and output. And you'll notice that when you do that, that Altium adds a arrow. One that this is showing it going in and this one's showing out. Now, if I don't want to have these arrows on here, I can go into my preferences and I can turn off pin direction and press apply, and it will turn off those directional arrows, even if this is an input or an output. So I was trying to scroll here and I'm in the dialog, so let's pull that over here. So unfortunately, that is kind of an all or nothing proposition. So yes, that may have remedied my issue with the diode over here. However, it's also going to impact every other component that may have had an input or an output as well. So I don't know of any way, and I was looking, because I know people are going to ask that question, like, is there a way to have an input without having the arrow? And in looking at the properties, they don't see a feature of that particular nature. So just wanted to bring that to your attention here. So I'm going to turn that one back on over here. So that's the pin direction. Okay. The next one we've got over here is the entry direction. This is kind of an unusual one, maybe possibly used by those people who are doing top-down design. That, by the way, there are a lot of systems engineers who use Altium Designer because they find it very easy to set up these sheet symbols and the hierarchical design, and then later on they get more detailed as to the harnesses and the buses and the wires. So they do top-down, and I have a suspicion that was made for this particular feature, may have been made for them. Excuse me. So let's take a look at this here. So all of these are sheet entries, and they have a corresponding port that's associated with them. So if I double click into SCL here, you'll notice that this is bidirectional, and this BRGB happens to be an input. And they do correspond to ports. So if I hold down my control key and double click it, you'll see that this port over here is indeed an input port. So the sheet entry and the ports are supposed to correspond with each other. Okay, and that's one of the things the ERC rule checker is that's certainly going to look for. So all of these actually have been assigned a port except for this one here, which is number 5, unspecified. And actually, just to show this this example here, I'm going to make this one an input. Actually, I'm going to go back because this one jumped back to this sheet here. I'm going to go here. This one's been assigned. This one over here has been assigned to an output. Okay, it jumped up to the other sheet here. So what I've got over here is I've got these here that are all assigned. They are associated with this particular schematic doc, except for this one here. And what happens is when I turn this off, actually I'm going to move this over so you can see it a little bit better. I'll zoom it out, you can see it better. And then we hit our TP to get into the preferences. They'll push this over a little bit. And if you go into the sheet directions and you hit apply here, you'll notice that this is the only one that gets put into what it looks like a bidirectional, but it's actually showing it as unspecified. So Altium's bidirectionals and unspecified look the same, so that there's no differentiation to see between it. But that's what this is doing over here. But what I've noticed is that anything that is already assigned to a port, it's going to maintain those directionals. These were bidirectionals here, by the way. So if I turn this back on and hit apply, you can see this one gets changed again. The other ones remain the same. So that's what that one does. Again, I'm not sure that there's huge value to that, and if there's something bigger I'm missing with that, feel free to comment on it. All right, the port direction here is kind of similar to the sheet entry direction. And so if we go back over here into TP here, you'll see that the port direction is turned on. What this means that this is actually going to have some type of orientation to it. So if I turn this off, right, and I press apply, you'll now notice that none of these things are really, you cannot really tell which end is in or which one is out. Okay? And so that's what that one is doing here. Also notice that the unconnect left to right is blanked out as well, and I'm going to show you that one here in a moment. But if I turn this back on and hit apply, now I can see my orientation. The second part of this, and let's see if I can pull this over here. I got to cancel this first. We'll pull this one over here and we'll jump back into it. What they're saying is unconnect left to right. So what you have over here is I'm showing some examples of what happens when they are connected versus when they're not connected. So if I go back in here and I say unconnect left to right, you'll notice that the output is going to actually flip over here, because what you're saying is if it's unconnected, you want to move, you want the flow of the arrow to show from left to right. So when I press apply, you see that the output here changed. This one did not change because it's actually connected to a wire. And that's all this is doing over here, is just giving you an option to see that. And some people get frustrated with this because they'll try to take this and they'll keep flipping it, but it'll keep flipping to the wrong side because this is turned on here, saying, hey, I'm trying to flip this. Well, it's not going to flip until it knows or it's connected to an arrow, and then at that point it will properly orient itself based on whether it's an input or an output. So just be aware of that. The next one I'm going to talk about is render text with GDI. This one's actually very, very important, and it helps out tremendously. It's one you probably would never want to turn off. I don't know of reasons why you'd want to unless you're having some major printer issues. Okay, what the GDI Plus does is basically, in a very brief way of saying it, what you see on the screen is what you expect to be printed. And so one of the problems that they were having, especially when you had boxes like this in your templates area, was that they would put this information in there and then they send it out to PDF, or they would do a hard copy of it, and the data was just running all into the next boxes. And they're saying, well, what's the true font? What are we really looking at over here? And that was what they were really struggling with. So with GDI turned on, what I want you to do is I want you to focus on the margin between a G and this edge here and the letter T and the edge. So when I zoom in, okay, notice that, and I'll just a little slower. When I zoom in, the margin is maintained, and the same thing is happening over here on this margin as well. And it happens too if I go down really small. Okay, so it's maintaining the margin. So what happens when we turn that off? Well, I'm going to move this over here because the minute I turn it off, you're going to see some stuff shift. So if I go into my TP and I turn this off and I press apply, okay, you'll notice that everything just kind of shifted. So what was happening before they really added this feature in here, and is as I move this along, these margins are going to bounce, especially when I get smaller. So if they get smaller, you'll see this bounced here again. I move again, and you're seeing that these margins are just being changed all the time. So again, nobody really understood what the difference was between what you were seeing on the monitor and what you were going to actually get in the PDF or the print. So that is the reason why they put this in there, and I'd highly recommend that you leave that one on. So there's that one over there. So let's jump on over here to page 3. Okay, this is drag orthogonal, and drag orthogonal is basically taking apart and dragging it down. Now this one over here is, and I've had some issues with this in the past, hopefully it won't be fussy with me, but today it is. So drag orthogonal, when it is turned off, it will drag it in any direction. So if I press OK and I drag it down, it's going to drag it in any direction. So one thing I'm going to do here, and I think this will help me, I'm going to delete this one, I'm going to copy this one, and I think that will help. Sometimes it seems it's retaining some of the information there. I think that's the way I fixed it the last time. No, okay, let's see. TP, let's turn this on now. Hopefully you'll be happier. No, how about this guy? No. All right, and this happened to me in a couple of the practice runs over here. The idea is that these would actually come down orthogonally with each other here. So today it's going to be a little persnickety. I'm going to try one more thing here. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to, I do need something that's got 2 pins in it. So let's go into miscellaneous connectors, HDR. 2-pin header will work. Let's place that down. Let's give this here a number so it's happy. And take that here, connect that like so. Drag that out, and let's see. No, we're not going to be happy campers about that today. Okay, very good. So what normally happens over here is when you drag orthogonal, when it's turned on, you will actually get these things to drag in an orthogonal way. These are actually being dragged in whatever angle is most convenient to it. Okay, so that's what's happening to this. So normally, if you turn that off, then you will get this pretty much at any particular angle. So that's what's happening with that one over there. And in relation to this one over here, there's another one which is called the drag step. And what the drag step is the gap that you'd normally have between them. So what you'd normally do is, let me go back to medium because sometimes that fixes it. Let's see if the medium will do it. No, not there either. So let's go back to this. What the drag step is how much gap that you want between each of the wires as you're dragging something along. Okay, so I'll draw them out for you. So the medium would look like this. If I was doing a place wire, just cut these wires here. We'll delete those, bring those down here. And we do a place wire. And we go down over here like so. This is how it would look once you got dragged. So you can see that a medium would be a drag of DXP of 10. Whereas, and I'm going to hit and then they have 3 other flavors. Or actually, you get 3 others. So if I go into medium, there's small, and there's smallest, and there's large. So I'll talk about each one of them. The small means that instead of doing a gap of 10 DXP, I'll hit my G key to go to 5. The gap would actually look like this. Okay, it takes you off grid. I'm not sure if you'd want to do something like that, but nevertheless, if something's kind of congested, it might help. Unfortunately, the smallest is the oddest one, and if you use it, it'll go no gap whatsoever, and it'll look literally like this here. So I'd never recommend the smallest one. And then the other one, the largest, is actually 20. So rather than doing a gap of 10, it would actually look like this instead. So I do apologize about that. I wasn't able to show it. Sometimes it's happened during the demo runs here, but nevertheless, it should work on yours. Again, keep in mind, I've been playing with my preferences all week here, and I probably have messed up a few registries in the process of doing so. But nevertheless, there it is. Yeah.
Paul, let me interrupt just for a second. I think some folks figured it out. You tried Shift Spacebar when dragging to change the mode.
Let's see, Shift Spacebar.
On previous preference that you couldn't get it to work.
Oh, let me see if I can get that. Oh, there you go. Thank you. I forgot about that part. Thanks. I got so busy in the preferences. Thank you. I really appreciate you bringing that in there. Yep, there we go. And I think because I did some rotations earlier on and some of the other things I was doing with wiring during my practices, I'd forgotten about that. So thank you for bringing that to my attention there. So there it is. So if I bring this up here now, I may as well demonstrate it. So if we go to TP here and we go over here to small, okay, and I bring this down here since I'm already in the Shift Spacebar. And again, thank you for bringing that up. I should have known that from all the routings I've done in the past. Then you'll see that the gap over here is now 5. If I go back over here to this here to the medium, we've seen that one already. That's the gap. And if I do the large here, it will do it as a gap of 20 there. So I do appreciate you bringing that one to my attention over there. Now, good. Since you guys are on top of things, maybe you can help me fix this one. I'll explain what it is, but I've not been able to fix it. I know it's worked in the past. So what this is called Include with Clipboard. And what including Clipboard is that if I wanted to take this picture over here and I wanted to copy it, but I don't want to have the ERC or the derivative, or pardon me, the directives or the notes, there's a way to turn those off over here in the preferences. So they're on by default. But if I don't want them on when I'm copying something, maybe I'm putting it into a Word doc or I'm putting it into a PowerPoint presentation, and I don't want all this additional stuff over here, it's supposed to, when I copy it, it's not supposed to be retained with it. So there's 2 areas or 2 things to keep in mind. When you copy it like this and you do a Control-C, it should remove those 3 things I mentioned. If I bring in a Word doc, for example, and I do a Control-V, but it seems as though it is still bringing these in even though these have been turned off. The other area too is that Altium actually has a pretty decent clipboard here. So it's one of the panels that you have, and if you were to copy this, it should have also copied this in with those, without those as well. However, I'm not able to make that happen. I did have someone try it in a 8018 beta, and I think it may still not be working correct. However, again, with you guys, some of you guys being some pretty good sleuths out there, if there's something I'm missing on that, feel free to provide that information, and Christopher will bring it to my attention here. In the meantime, let's go back over here and take a look at the next section. So we've kind of covered this side here. Let's take a look at the alphanumeric suffixes. So this one by default is an alpha. And the idea behind this, this alphanumeric suffix is if you have a multi-module component, then the question is, how do you represent the individual components of that? Now, Altium unfortunately doesn't allow you to customize the names of those submodules. I wish they would, but they don't. But you can at least control how it's being represented here on the screen. So give me a moment because I'm going to zoom this in. So what you're looking at here is a resistor pack. So there's 8 of these resistors that represent that resistor pack. And what you normally have is you have a designator followed by a letter. But we can change that to a number, and I'll show you that right now. So if we go here into our preferences, this is what you'll see by default. Okay, so A through H. But if you want to actually have a number, they give you 2 options. One that's preceded with, which is prefixed with a dot, so we'll click on that one. And then you have another one that's prefixed by a colon, and we'll press apply over there, and you see that one over here. So that's, so there you go on that one there. All right, and unfortunately, again, they don't have an ability to give you custom names for each one of these, which I think would certainly help with FPGAs, but that's for another argument for another time. Pin margins. Pin margins are an interesting creature, and I think over time with the ability to make custom pins here, this you have a lot more control than you probably had when Altium Designer first came out. But what this is basically the default margins for both the pin name and the pin number. And what do I mean by that? So let's take a look at this one here. So here is this particular component. If I go into our preferences here, you'll see that there's the name and the number. And what it is it's saying how many pixels that do you want me to move this from, based on not the hotspot of the pin, but the opposite end of the pin. Okay? And I don't want to say left or right because these pins over here, it's flipped. So it's really just taking a look at whether you're talking about the designator or you're talking about the pin number here. So just to demonstrate this here, here's the margin, which is set at 5. So I'm going to double it and watch the A, B, C, D, E, and F over there because it's going to move. And you can see that now it got pushed further in on both on each side over here. And with the number, it goes the opposite way. I'll actually push it further out. So if I go 16 on this, and now pushes it back out here. So be really careful about this because this may have made this one look a little bit better. However, it impacts everything. So again, if you're really wanting to make modifications to your pins, then definitely go into the properties, especially in your library, and take a look at the name, position, and font, and the designator position and font. Turn on the customization, and they give you a lot of options here to customize this to your heart's content. So I wouldn't really mess with this one over here in the preferences. So I'll move those back here. And that was 8. Okay. The next one that they've got in here is called Document Scope for Filtering and Selection. This one went away in Altium Designer 18, at least in the generals page. I don't know if they moved it somewhere else. I don't like it to begin with because I think it's kind of a dangerous one. And what this is saying over here is that when you open up something to do filtering or you're going to do some type of editing on a global nature here, it's asking, do you want to start off in the current document or do you want to start off with open documents? You always want to start off small and then grow out to something bigger, because if you're working in a document and you make changes to those documents and you don't realize that you made changes to 20 other documents, it could be a huge effort to clean up what you've done, especially if you didn't realize you did that for quite a while and you've done all this saving, and later on, maybe minutes if not hours later on, you realize, oh my, I've messed up a whole lot of sheets over here. So you want to be careful about this. I'd recommend that you leave this one to current document. And what I mean by that here in particular is that, let's say for instance, I select this primitive, which is a text primitive. I right click and I do find similar objects. Well, pretty much any type of these type of finding things or filtering type of things, they'll give you a scope. And you can see that because my preferences have been set under this particular scope, it's starting off with current document, but it allows me to say, hey, I want you to do this to all open documents, or I can do it to all the project documents, even if they're not open as well. But I'd rather start off small and then make that decision to expand my search or my global edits to something larger through my actions rather than have Altium automatically assume that I want to do this through open documents. So that's why I'd recommend that you leave this current document open. If we do change it, you'd see that it would default to open documents by default every single time. So that's what we've got over there. All right, what other goodies do we have on this one? This is the auto increment placer, and there's two places where this is primarily used. This is used for placing down pins, and it is used when you are placing down parts. So let me just give an example over here. So I'm going to put a 5 here, and we'll press OK. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back over to the libraries, and I'm just going to take a part. This is fine. And I'm going to place down a couple of parts. So what happens is that when I go in here, I still have to seed it. But let's say I'm going to start it with 5, and I want to increment 5 every step thereafter. Well, the preferences allow me to do that because I've set this now to 5. Okay? And that's what I can do with that over here. So make sure you set the first one correctly, because it's always going to base it plus whatever your initial one is. So if I put, for example, if I started with P1 and my preferences show 5, well, the next one's going to be 6, 11. You get the gist at that point, and it will be, it's not what I'm going to want to have. It also works very, very well with pins, and I will show you a little example of this here. So the reason it works well with pins is you can do some incrementing and decrementing. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. If you're still doing this over here where you're hitting PP and you're having these things increment and decrement, that's okay. I would recommend that you look at the Smart Grid Insert. That is a very, very powerful tool. It allows you to basically create your pin sets in a Excel sheet. And once you've done that, you can use the Smart Grid Insert, and it will do almost everything you need to do, including the XY coordinates if you want to do it. But nevertheless, I just do want to demonstrate this here. So if I've got a display of 1, and I've got this 1 over here, well, I didn't change the increment, I don't believe. So you can see the increments are going to continue up. Now you'll notice that D3, D4, D5, and those other ones here are continuing with this single increment, because that actually here in the preferences is the secondary. I really wish they would just call this one, they give these things more specific names rather than primary and secondary, but that's what it's doing here. The primary number in the pins represents the pin numbers. That's why you're seeing this increment here, and the secondary represents the name. So here's another feature a lot of people might find kind of useful. I could actually make this a -1. So if I again hit PP to start my pins here, and I start with a designator name of, for example, D0, but my designator starts at 8. Okay, and I start this well, yeah, it's still going to be pin 8 because we don't usually have a pin 0. So we'll do this here, and you can see as I move it along, it's decrementing. One's decrementing down and one is decrementing up. So you can do that there as well. The last one I'll show you here is an interesting one. It's called Remove Leading Zeros. I like it and I don't, and maybe I'm missing something on this, so if someone wants to comment on it, they can. I'll demonstrate it, and you'll see why I like it and I don't. I'll press OK here, and again, I'm going to hit PP to get into the place pins. And in the designator here, I'm just going to put a bunch of zeros, okay? And in fact, I'll even put a name here like D. So it's pretty smart about these things here. So if I have D000020, and my designator over here is 0020, it will place it down. However, because I have the remove 0 on, the subsequent ones, it will remove the zeros. So not really sure where, unless you're maybe doing some type of copy and paste, this is supposed to assist you. And then afterwards, maybe you have to go in here and clean this up. So that's the only thing I can kind of think of as to why we might want to use something like this. But nevertheless, they make that available to you here in the preferences. So, okay, the next one we're going to talk about is cross-port references. And cross-port references is an interesting one. A lot of people don't know about this here. But Altium does have the ability to provide you some information in your sheets. And as a matter of fact, here's an example of it right here. So I was playing with this a little bit earlier on. And what the idea is that if you want to know where this is actually going or provide this information because you're going to print out these sheets and they would like to know where this is and they don't have to go shuffle through 20 different sheets, you can give them the name of the sheet that this is associated to, and you can either give them coordinates or you can give them the zone. So how do we do that? Well, to get this started here, you've got to go into Reports, Cross-Port Reference, and then you've got to add it to the sheet. Okay. So if I click on it there, these have already been added in. And that's how you'd add these in. Now, sometimes if you go into cross-port references and these are grayed out, that means you've got to compile it. Okay? And once you've got these in over here, even if we make a change, so if we go in here and I change these back to the defaults are the name and the zone. okay, and I press OK, these don't change up until I actually go back into the reports, cross-port reference, and add it to the sheet. And now you can see the name of the file that it's referring to and the zone that it's associated with. So it's somewhat useful. I think that's something really useful when you've got something that's being printed out. But those are really the options that you've got over there. Either you're going to show it by name or you're going to show it by sheet number. So here, I'll notice this here. The number means the sheet number. If I press OK again, this doesn't change because I've got to go into reports and update it. So this would be sheet number 2. That's what you're seeing over here. And you'd have to make sure that you actually put in the sheet information. And that can be done under Tools. Let's see, Annotation. They move these things around a little bit here to shrink this menu up, which is a good thing. And then they do the number of schematic sheets here. And you can clean these things up. But if you don't have anything over here, this will actually show as blank. So that's what we've got on that one over there. Then the last thing we'll show over here on this page is the templates. And this is kind of an interesting page because it's actually broken into 2 parts. The first one over here says, well, which template do you want to use? But more importantly, you got to tell it which directory you need to find these templates in. And they give you a little hint over here saying, look, go under Data Management Templates option in order to tell me which directory you want me to find this information in. So if we go over here to Data Management and into the templates, you can see that right now I have it defaulted to Altium Designer. So when you install Altium Designer, it asks you 2 questions about installation. It asks you where do you want the actual root directory to be housed, right, or stored. And then the second one is going to ask you is, hey, we've got these extra files here, like examples and libraries, if you want to call them that these days, and templates. Where do you want us to put them? So most of the time, if you just leave the defaults, it's going to put it in your public documents in Altium Designer. And I don't remember if they added this in or if I add this in. A lot of times I also add in a subdirectory because I try to keep multiple versions on the computer here. But that's what it's going to pick up over here. And if we go back over to our schematics and we go back over to General, here, these, as long as they have an SCHDOT extension to them, which is the schematic templates, it's going to be able to find it. Now, you got pretty much one of 2 options. Either you can take your company's SCHDOT file and bury it in the Altium's template, or if you have a company directory, you would go under Data Management Templates and change that to your company's directory and use that one. There's one other feature over here you'll notice. It's called sheet size. So if I don't pick a template, I said I don't want to deal with it, but I want a default sheet by, every time I open up Altium, it will allow me to select one. But the minute I select a template, because the template by its nature has a sheet already determined, it's going to gray this one out. The only other thing I'll mention about this over here is that if you do decide to go with a sheet with it, one of the things that Altium does provide, they provided this really from day one, is if you go into Design Document Options, they'll give you some of the basic templates like the zones, and they'll give you the so they give you the reference zones. That's what I was looking for, the title block over here, and you can play with it. But what you see is what you get on this. Whereas if you create your own SHDOC, you can really customize it to your company's needs. So just be aware of that here. Okay, what other goodies do we have? So that pretty much takes care of the general page here. Let's talk about the default units for just a moment, and then we'll talk. Actually, before we do that, let's talk about the break wire. This is kind of a neat feature, and we'll take a look at that one over here. So let me go over to my break wire. So break wire is a command. It's under Edit Break Wire. Okay, and this is kind of one of the ways that we were breaking wires long before Altium got a little bit better with its ability to add and delete segments on things here. So it was one of their other features that they had. So it's been in there for a long time. And I'll zoom my cursor in so you can see it. And what's interesting about this, before we do anything else, if I hit TP, go back into this, what you see over here is what you'll get when you enter into the command. So if I hit E to get into the editor, W to do the cut wire, and I hit my tab key, you're going to see the exact same things that you would have seen in the preferences anyway. So let's take a look at what this thing can do. All right, so the one that's by default, by the way, is Snap Grid Multiple Size. I'm going to press OK here. And when you invoke this here, you'll see that we have a box with these 2 little edges. And if you put it over the wire, this is where it's going to cut it. So if I click down here, I can cut the wire to that length. And it gives me the option to change those lengths. If I want a smaller length, for example, like a length of 5, I can do that. Or, and this is another kind of a neat feature that they've got in this. Let's go back into this here, hit the tab key. If you want to get rid of the entire segments, so let's say you've got a bunch of these things all over the place, it's kind of neat because if you do snap the segment, it will basically delete the entire thing. So if I press OK, I'll click on this, and this one, okay, this one's a little, I found a little bit of an issue over there. Nevertheless, I can do that. Even a larger one I can delete at that point here. So this one I would still have to sweep over it. But nevertheless, that's the idea behind it. I guess I never tried to cut it that small before when I did my practice sessions. So that's what they're doing with that. The other thing that they do is they give you all of these interesting ways of looking at it. So if you want the cutter box, which is basically the box, whether you never want to see it or only see it on the wire, you can do that. Same thing with the extremity markers if you only want to see on the wire. So for example, if I turn those off, I have a little X, but once I bring it here, it'll show me where it's going to delete. I'm going to hit the tab key here. Let's go back to a multiple of 3 for now. And so you can see my cursor's off, now it's on, and now I see the box and I see those little edge markers there. So kind of a neat little feature to have. And again, they have a preference set for it, but you can get to those preferences just by invoking the command and then going into the its properties by hitting the tab key. So what other goodies do we have over here? Let's go over here to TP again, and let's talk about the default units. So they do have the default units. My understanding is this may have been moved in Altium Designer 18, but nevertheless they do have it here. The default has always been this thing called DXP units, and the reason they used this was that Altium at the time was trying to, again, to find a compromise between the fact that it really needed some type of grid system, but at the same time, schematics by their nature are dimensionless. So that's why they came up with this idea of DXP units. And what they based it on, and you can see the little explanation that they have over here, is it's 10 times the number of mils. So if you're working in DXP units of 10, for example, you're actually working in 100 mils. Or if a DXP unit of 5, it's 50 mils, and so on and so forth. And yeah, you can change these, and of course, sometimes what happens is that library parts are made in mils rather than in DXP defaults, and so it kind of propagates over to your design. And so sometimes you'll see 10 over here, and sometimes you'll see 100 mils, but generally speaking, you're really just working in a very similar measurement system. There is the metric system here as well. I've seen some commentary by folks who are using the metric system in their schematics. Probably the biggest disadvantage is that if there's anything that you want to get from Altium or from other sources that are providing libraries, they're going to obviously be in these DXP units, because Altium's been around for almost 20 years, and they've built almost everything based on DXP units. But the other reason you got to keep this in mind too is that a lot of people actually use the schematic editor off-label, and they draw a lot of things in it here too. And so it's kind of nice to have that metric system if you wanted to do something outside of doing schematics, which again are dimensionless. But I've known people to draw some really cool things in the schematic editor that had nothing to do with PCBs or electronics. So that's what you've got over here. And there's different flavors of it, and you can take a look at these, and they do a pretty good job explaining which ones they are. My recommendation is just leave this one well enough alone. When it comes to the PCB side, obviously you're dealing with real dimensions, and that's where you probably want to have that debate in your company or office as to which measuring system you want to use, whether it's SI or Imperial. That one recommendation I'll make, just as a very side note, is that you don't want to keep jumping back and forth, because you're going to start getting rounding error creep in your design, and that's not going to be a good thing. So nevertheless, on the schematic side, it's dimensionless. Stay with the DXP units. Everybody's got libraries built in them. It's probably the easiest thing to do. The last one I'll talk about is the grid. And the grids are kind of interesting because I think we know them, and yet there's some interesting things that go with them too if you start playing around with it. The top part, you've got two options. You have line and you have dot. If you're going to do dot, my recommendation is actually pick a darker color. So if I press OK here and apply it, hopefully the granularity, let me cancel this so you can see it a little bit better. But I don't know how good the granularity is with GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar here, but you can see the little dots here, and obviously you'd want them to be a little bit darker so that you can see the dots if you want to work that way. If you don't and you want to have your lines, you can. I mean, this kind of looks cool, but then after a while it becomes a little bit of an eyesore, so you probably want to go back to a darker color. I finally figured out what the default color is. It's not under basic, it's under standard, and it looks like it's kind of maybe a 20% gray shade. So when you press OK or apply this, you'll see this over here. Now, these grids that you see here, I'm not going to talk about the metric one, though it works the exact same way here as the Imperial one, and the Imperial one obviously is in lock sync with the DXP one as well. There's three types of grids. There is the snap grid, there is the electrical grid, and there's a visible grid. So the easiest one obviously is the visible grid. And you'll notice that these are all set to the same amount, and I'd recommend it. I was playing with this saying, well, what if we were to change these things here to 50 mils, and we change this one over here to, for example, we change this one over to 1 mil. Well, let's take a look at what happens here. So I'm going to press this here, and I'm actually going to go to this grid page here, and I'm going to zoom in. So what happens is that when I do that, every time I hit my G key to switch the grid, I'm going to get a different grid. Okay, so if, and by the way, if you want to see that at the bottom left-hand corner, I'm currently at a grid of 5. If I hit the G key again, I'll go to 10. So it's actually flipping between each one of those 3 listings that I have over here in the preferences. So each time I hit that G key, it's flipping between those. All right. But what happens here is that as I do this, so if I hit my G key, you'll notice that these grids are changing with each one because I changed it to different sizes. Where the problems begin with this, if you do this, is that if I am at a grid of 1 and I move this up a little bit, and now I change over to another grid here, so I hit the G key again, I don't know if you can see this, but I'm actually off here by one DXP. The problem is I can't get it back onto that grid. And in order for me to do that, I would have to go back to a grid of 1, but now I only see the grid that I've set up for a grid of 1. So it's just better that you leave these visible grids to basically be all the same, and they all default to 100 over here. So, and then from there I can make that fix if I wanted to. So if I hit the G keys again, it doesn't matter. I'm hitting, here I am pounding away at it, and the visible grid is still remaining the same. So that's good. And if I wanted to move this back, I could hit my G key to go back to 1, and now I know that I'm going to be on the grid, which is a good thing. So just be aware of that. The other thing that we've seen is the snap grid, and obviously that's what we've been doing here the whole time. The visible grid is what you see with your eye, but the snap grid is what it's actually snapping to as we move things along. The last one over here is the electrical grid. And I don't like this term, and when I first saw it, it drove me crazy because the numbers that they were putting over here were not multiples of 5. And I just didn't like that. So I had to try to figure out what the electrical grid is. I think a better name for this should be called the electrical vortex. Because really what it's doing is it's saying, how close do I need to be to something before it pulls it in to where it needs to go? Now for this example over here, I've actually put in 400 because I'm going to exaggerate this here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to place a pin, I'm going to place a wire. And what 400 is basically 4 of these clicks here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. And what you're going to see is as I get closer to the wire, once I pass this 4th click here, it's going to instantly jump me over there. And that just will show you how the electrical grid works. So I'm going to hit PW, and I'm going to start, and I'm moving along. Here, actually, I'm going to change my grid to, well, actually, I don't need to because it should still pop it. Is it going to do it? No, you're going to make a, give me a time. Here we go. That's right, because I was not on that grid. I'll explain why that didn't work in just a moment. So as I move here, once I get beyond the 4, you'll see that it now jumps. So hopefully you can see that X. And if I just click down, it's now completed over there. So that's what's happening. The reason why it wasn't working when I was in there is because I was not on that line. So if I go back here, when I was at a DXP of 1, this was the electrical grid. What I wanted to be was on the grid of 10, which this would be the electrical grid. So that's why it didn't work at that moment there. So anyways, there you go. That shows you the grids there. All right. So at this point in time, I do have another polling question for you. So let's bring that one up. We'd just like to know what you thought of it here, and just get an idea so that if we do these in the future, we can adjust accordingly. All right, and so it looks like most of you guys, a huge percentage of you guys said it's just about right, and there's a small percentage that either you're swimming right now, and I can't blame you. If you're new to this, you're probably saying, wow, there's quite a bit over here. And then for those probably also saying way too much, I totally would agree with you. There's a lot more switches than I think necessarily need to be. I think the big thing to walk away with here is that most of the switches you'll do fine if you just leave well enough alone. What we're trying to do over here is to show you what you get if you play with it so that you don't have to spend a lot of that time here doing it. And we do have one more polling question here, and this has to do with customizable configuration. So we'll let that one go. And this was just asking if you guys are interested in a configuration management training here. And it looks like we're a little bit split on that too, and we totally understand that it's one of those things that's personal based on company stuff here. So so very good. I really appreciate getting that input from you here. So you're here for a reason. And the reason why you're here is that you want to know Altium Designer better. And more importantly, you want to know what these preferences are because you believe that they may better assist you. Maybe you learned something today, said, I didn't know I could do that. Or you know what, I'm going to try that on my next project. And that's a good thing. But more importantly, we know that you're on a really busy schedule. There's a lot of stuff that's on your shoulders, and there's very little time to investigate these type of things. And just to kind of let you know, for example, that for this webinar alone, we put in well over 24 hours into it because there was a lot of experimentation. How are we going to show this? And more importantly, we had to do some research because some of these things I was really pulling my hair out on. Why is this not working? What's this happening over here? And some of them still slip me, right? For example, the one with the orthogonal, I totally forgot about the shift spacebar. So there's a lot of these little caveats that get thrown into the mix with that over here. So we get that this is not a trivial effort to go look into all of these things that you have in the software. Okay. The big thing we want to mention is that preferences are really a part of something much, much bigger. They are part of your configuration management. What's configuration management anyways? Well, it's the look and feel of your libraries and your schematics. It's definitely your templates, and there's many different types of templates out there that need to be considered. And also the management of your documents and your libraries. Where are we putting these things? How are we going to name them? How do we access these things? Who can access these things? And so on and so forth. So we know that configuration management is not a trivial task, especially in printed circuit board design. But we want to let you know that we've been there and done that. We certainly have done that in our prior careers before coming into 9.connects. And if you are interested in something like configuration management training, our instructors have been through this process. You're not just talking to somebody who's pushing a tool. You're talking to somebody who has had to design and has had to go into the labs and has had to figure out what went wrong, what's going right, is this going to work, is the prototype ready for prime time, those type of things. We've done that all at one point or another. We provide these type of trainings on site, so it's not like a public training. We want to customize this specific to your needs because everybody's workflow is unique. And the number of training days and topics are totally driven by you, whatever topics that you want to talk about, the number of days, number of people. Some people's like, look, train these 2 people up. Other people say, here's 20, train these guys up and gals so that they all know what they're doing here so that so we can all have something that's uniform. We can have an intelligent discussion about it. So we've seen it done both ways. If you're interested in this, take a look at our website here, so 9.connects.com. We call this our area 9.51 trainings. These are trainings that are custom, and that's why we kind of somewhat call them stealth trainings because we don't have a formal manual for them, but they're things that we can certainly train on as well. So for more information, feel free, of course, to take a look at our website. So folks, I want to thank you for all of your time here and also for training the trainer here in that one particular switch. So that was fine. Again, just want to give you a reminder that next month on the 20th, we'll continue with part 2. That one should be very interesting because those graphical editing capabilities might be of great use to you. And with that, we'll conclude. You have a wonderful day.